Hey everybody, it's your old pal Tom here on the Tom Gulley Show. Let me tell you about the Donner Party. Yeah, the Donner Party. I don't know if you've heard of the Donner Party before. It's not maybe the kind of party any of us want to attend. The Donner Party was a party of people, you see, a party that was trying to go across the United States to California. I don't know if you've ever done that before, but if you do, you're going to have to go through some mountains. And you're going to have to pick the right time of year. And you're going to probably not have to have gotten instructions from somebody that didn't give you the right instructions. And you got to make sure and take enough food and or livestock that you can use as food. And if you don't do that, well, then you're going to have to do what made the Donner Party famous, which is eat some of your traveling companions. And, well, let's just say you're not going to be eating indeterminate people that you've never met before. You will be eating family and friends and acquaintances that you've known through a long journey. And that's the story of the Donner Party. But there's many more details that we'll get into later. Now, I wish that I could say that we're going to treat this subject with great reverence and the appropriate decorum, which we will. We will do that, but we will also probably make a lot of jokes about it, which is really wrong. It's nothing to be joking about, but, you know, it was a long time ago. So we will. This, of course, is our cold open. We do this for our audio podcast listeners so that they know there's a show following. I'm about to play a couple songs. Why am I going to play those songs? Well, it's not to confuse the audio podcast audience. No. They want us to get down to cases and tell the jokes and talk about the Donner Party and all that stuff. However, it's also a live interactive YouTube show, and so we need people to file into our chat room, and to do that, we have to wait for them to arrive and get their notifications and stuff, and to cover that period of time, about 7 minutes, I play incredible songs by our incredible music director, Leon Kennedy, that are about me and the show, and they're great toe tappers. But if you don't want to listen to them, nobody's mad at you, no one will judge you. If you're listening on our audio podcast platforms or watching on demand on YouTube, just scroll right through those and get to the meat, yes, pun intended, of the show. Yeah. Anyway, here's a couple tunes, and then I will tell you about the hopefulness, the anguish, the hardships, and the menu let me tell you about the Donner Party.
If Tom was down in Texas, would he podcast with a smile? If he was in Ohio, could he fly? Behind his desk, wherever, can he see us through the screen? to go far, popping some pills for the man with the Letterman star. And if Tom came to your country, would you keep him for a while, surrounding yourself in his familiar smile? And when he comes around, the stadiums fill up fully. They shout, "Is that him, Mr. Gulley? Is that Tom? It's Tom Gulley." They yell, "Is that him, Mr. Gulley? Is that Tom? It's Tom Gulley." They say, "Is that him, Mr. Gulley? Is that Tom? It's Tom Gulley." Passing by an exit, like reflections low, you're leaving behind what you've come to know. Turn that dial as the white lines roll, and tune in to that familiar show. We're passing in the night, two strangers on the highway. On the highway, headlights burning bright. We're passing in the night, two strangers on the road. On the road, tuned into the Tom Gulley Show. Leaving on the turning, the sun begins to rise. The lights ahead are burning as you rub your tired eyes. Turn up that radio as the lines start to slur, and just enjoy that familiar show. We're passing in the night, two strangers on the highway. On the highway, headlights burning bright. We're passing in the night, two strangers on the road. On the road, tuned into the Tom Gulley Show. All the greatest moments, Tom voice from the dark, pulling off the highway, every stop's a stop. We're passing in the night, two strangers on the highway. On the highway, headlights burning bright. Passing in the night, two strangers on the road. On the road, tune in to the Tom Gulley Show.
Hey everybody, what's going on? What's hot? What's hip? What's happening? What's shaking? Let me tell you about the Donner Party. Yes, the Donner Party, sometimes called the Donner Reed Party, but they quit calling it that because of a famous actress from It's a Wonderful Life and the Donner Reed show, Donna Reed. She's never eaten another human, pretty sure. We'd know if she did. The Donner Party was a group of people, a very fluid group of people, by the way. There's a lot of twists and turns. They tried to get to California through a well-known route. There's a bunch of things they did wrong. There's a huge villain in this story that's probably responsible for these people being stranded and being forced to consume family members. By the way, I hope you have a lot of Easter Sunday dinner leftovers over. You're probably not going to want to eat those during this program, but I will tell you everything that happened. And truly, on the one hand, from the standpoint of me that's a journalist and a historian and a person that likes to examine actual facts regarding commonly held beliefs about historic events, this is a tale of survival like no other. It really is something quite impressive to certain degrees. But as a person that's kind of a jerk, it's an opportunity for a lot of jokes about cannibalism. And you don't get that a lot. You just don't. So we will try to weave a stew, if you will. There's the first one of those two disparate elements as we continue here. But before we get started, do me a favor, like, share, subscribe, retweet, notification bell, all the absolutely free things that you can do that help our show out. I mean, it just costs you a click. Clicks are free, and it helps us out with the algorithm, the almighty, all-powerful, all-knowing algorithm. Also, in our YouTube chat room live, we do have super chats, we have memberships, we have gifted memberships. The memberships are only $2.99 a month, so that's a great way to contribute. Our goal every night, as usual, is any amount of money. If you go to our YouTube description, there's also the PayPal, where you give the most, I get the most, and then there's the TomGulleyShow.com. Tons of fun stuff there, including our merchandise store. And there's links to that in our various places as well. So get yourself a shower curtain with our logo on it. Anyway, let's go to our YouTube chat room very quickly. Our interactive YouTube chat room, which really spices the show up. And if you're eating something bland, what better than spice? Butterjick Jones is here. He says, Donner, party of 7. Yeah, I've been doing that. Donner, party of 10. Donner, party of 9. Donner, party of 8, because it's decreasing, because you see there's more. The chef is here. He says the chef is on the couch, a well-earned break on a Monday night. Butterdick Jones and the chef have been talking about restaurant work for the last few days in our chat room. Chef, I miss cooking. It was a lot more simple than construction, and the owner of the restaurant would, wow, I didn't read that ahead of time, would do illegal things with them. Chef says, Butter, you can build my restaurant. CIA is here. And I've mentioned to CIA that the process is not working at the Arsenal Football Club. And I might do a show on the history of the bottle featuring Mikel Arteta. That's bottle is a term that in the United States we would call it choke. CIA says the process can be like the Donner Party, or you could be positive that Arteta is focusing on the big 2 trophies. I wonder how the Donner Party would have done if Arteta had been there. Worse than now, because you can focus on the 2 big trophies. The one trophy you should win, the Premier League, that you should win. Now, a lot of people have said they've got it in the bag. I don't believe that. I think that there's a collapse ahead, but the FA Cup is an attainable trophy. The Champions League, way they're playing, I don't know. Donner Kebab Party, which I'd rather not consume. Yeah, they didn't make kebabs. We'll get into what they actually made here in just a second, because it's now time for me to tell you about the Donner Party. Incidentally, this is going to be a kind of a long show because so much stuff happened. The Donner Party, sometimes called the Donner Reed Party, not to be confused with Donna Reed, were these pioneers who were trying to migrate to California in a wagon train, an actual wagon train from the Midwest. Delays, mishaps, all sorts of stuff caused them to eat people. Now, let's not be too harsh. Most of the people that they ate died of other causes, including their own starvation. Me personally, if someone dies of the flu, maybe I'm not eating that meal. Flu meat, I don't want to eat flu meat. But they did, in one case, actually murder and eat 2 of their guides. And I'm sorry, once again, if you're going to eat some people and you're going to kill them and eat them, why the guides? That would be the last people that I would eat, would be the guides. Oh, also, let me just start things off here with, this is a diary page from a guy named Patrick Breen. And, he was a guy that was part of the Donner Party, but I think he went off for help and came back. And you can see, if you look like a quarter of the way down, that they commenced to eat the dead people, it says in his diary. Commenced, which is, commenced. That's an old school word, isn't it? Anyways. During the 1840s, there was this huge influx of settlers leaving to the east to resettle in either the Oregon Territory or California. Now, the Oregon Territory was thought to be vast, pure, unspoiled, and that was true. California, at least part of that time, was a place people would going because of the gold rush or, certain other appeals in California, which was much more developed and settled than Oregon, although it wasn't that developed and settled. And at the time, there were 2 ways to get out west. One was a very long sea voyage. And on that sea voyage, you likely couldn't take tons of people and you likely couldn't take a ton of your own property. And the other method was an extremely difficult overland journey. Okay? Patrick Breen himself thought that California, which, by the way, was then part of Mexico, was a place where he could live in a Catholic culture. There were other people that were attracted to major economic opportunities or just inspired by manifest destiny, which was the belief in the United States that the United States was destined, almost willed by God, to expand all the way to the other shore. Basically a belief that from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, this land belonged to European Americans and they needed to settle it. So most of the people took a wagon train, which was, you've seen wagon trains in movies and stuff, just a whole bunch of wagons of people having their own property and their families with them that banded together. The idea being that, well, if we all go together, we can help along the way and we won't be by ourselves, and Indians and things of that nature. Most of these people followed the Oregon Trail, which started, here's what the Oregon Trail was. And as you can see, the Oregon Trail, sorry, audio podcast listeners, starts in Independence, Missouri, and it goes through the Continental Divide, which is, I'll get to that in a second. But Independence, Missouri, just a town in Missouri, a regular old town. But it was the starting off point. And the Continental Divide, there were several divides. Okay, there was the Great Divide, which was the Continental Divide. the Arctic Divide, the St. Lawrence Divide, the Great Basin Divide. There's many, many, many divides, which were created mostly by mountains or other geological barriers, okay? And the Continental Divide started way up in the Bering Sea in Alaska and went way down to the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, and it was very, very daunting. We're talking mountains here, and not little mountains, the biggest mountains in the United States, except for Alaska. These wagon trains could travel about 15 miles a day, and the trip would take them to about 4 to 6 months to complete. Think about it, half a year, every day, 15 miles, 15 miles, 15 miles, unless you met uphill, woods, things of that nature, and then it could slow you down. The trail generally followed rivers. So they were going along rivers to a place called the South Pass. The South Pass was a mountain pass, actually, in present-day Wyoming, which was relatively easy for wagons to negotiate. And at the South Pass, these pioneers had to make a decision. They had a choice. Which way am I going to go? And it's at this point that we mention the villain of our story, a man by the name of Lansford Hastings. Lansford Hastings. Keep that man and his ugly mug in your head, and I will read these chats very quickly. CIA says, I've heard human tastes more like chicken than beef. Well, it depends on how you season it. Guido Samurai is here. Always good to see Guido. So this guy, Lansford Hastings, was from Ohio, and he was one of the first migrants to get out to the West, okay? And he published this thing, this very, very bad thing. He might as well have put cooking tips in it. He published a little booklet that was called The Emigrant's Guide to Oregon and California. And he did it to encourage people to settle that part of the world. And if we look at the cover of this thing, Emigrant's Guide, Oregon, California, containing scenes and incidents of a party of Oregon emigrants. Description of Oregon, description of California and different routes. All necessary information relative to the equipment, supplies, and the method of traveling. But this little booklet was a sham. You see, as an alternative to the Oregon Trail's standard route through Idaho's Snake River Plain, he proposed what he called a more direct route, which actually increased the trip's journey by 125 miles, which might not sound much to you and I in an automobile, but keep in mind, that's like a week in 15-mile-a-day language. That would get you to California across the Great Basin. The Great Basin, taking travelers through the Wasatch Range and across the Great Salt Lake Desert. Now, as someone who has lived near the Wasatch, who has crossed the Wasatch, and who will soon be moving back to that area, south of that area, I'm going to tell you right now, this is a place that's kind of impassable to this day. Yes, there's highways and things like that, but it ain't easy. There are places out there where you have to leave a county, go outside of it, and come back the other way to get to the other end of the county. This is a place where Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid hid out in Robert's Roost, and the cowboys and the sheriffs and stuff at the time went, we're not going up there. That's for fools. To make things worse, our good friend and evil villain of this story, Lansford Hastings, had not actually traveled any part of his proposed shortcut well after the book was published until 1846 on a trip from California to Fort Bridger. Fort Bridger, a tiny little supply station that was run by legendary mountain man Jim Bridger. Okay? And this was at Black's Fork, Wyoming. I'm showing a lot of pictures, sorry, audio podcast listeners, of just the vastness. These are these actual places. And most of these photos have been taken in today's times, showing just how vast and desolate they are, even to this day, okay? So this guy who's given out this book, Here's How You Get to California and Oregon, he hadn't taken any part of this route that involved a shortcut until later, and he only took it to Wyoming from California. He was already in California, took it back the other way. Yeah. Hastings stayed at this fort to persuade travelers to turn south on his route. Okay. And as of 1846, Hastings was the second person documented to have crossed the southern part of the Great Salt Lake Desert, but he hadn't been accompanied by, what are those things called again? Oh, yes, wagons. He had no wagons with him. And that's important because the Great Salt Lake Desert, in many places, is salt flats. Salt flats can be extremely hard. You can land and take off in a plane on them. But in other places and during certain times of the year, they can be very soft and marshy. And he didn't have to worry about that, our friend Lansford Hastings. Oh my goodness, we've got so much in our chat room. Oh boy. Butterdick Jones says Lanny Hastings just sounds evil. It does, and he looks evil to me personally. Ladies and gentlemen, a living legend has entered our chat room. SG Fanboy, who has created some of the most wonderful AI composites of me as Sherlock Holmes and Captain Kirk and Columbo and all these other characters. We love SG Fanboy. We see him so rarely these days, but just to show how classy. The guy is classy. All right? He has sent 5 Tom Gulley Show gift memberships to people in the crowd. He is class. Everything we do here is classy. And he is at the front of the classy train, let me tell you. He really is. Good to see you, SG Fanboy. So 5 lucky people just got a gift membership to the Tom Gulley Show. Butterdick Jones says, thanks, SG. What a pal. SG salutes. I salute him back. Butterdick Jones says, as the Australians say, good on you. And then he says a word I can't say on the show. Tim Jenkinson says, I wondered if there will be a Tom Gulley Show in the future covering all the madness that's happening now. And then he asks, any chance you will be taking a vacation to Southampton this year, Tom? There's absolutely no chance of that. We should have beaten the brakes off of them. I was on the phone with my dad, and my dad is not a big soccer fan, not like me anyway. But he's very interested in my love of Arsenal. And he knows my favorite team is Arsenal and all that stuff. And he asked me, hey, you got any games this weekend? And I said, yeah, we got a tournament match against a team we ought to just beat the tar out of. Little did I know, it's rumored Kepa is going to leave the team. And I'm like, let him. Anyway, back to our story. Arguably most difficult we have one more quick chat at the end. Coach Mike Rodick is here, a living legend. Oh, never mind. I thought you were talking about me, Tom. But yes, SG is more deserving that title. He really is. He's quite a guy, is SG. Anyway, arguably the most difficult part of the journey to California was the last 100 miles. And the last 100 miles took place across the Sierra Nevada mountain range. As you can see, sorry, audio podcast listeners, but I'll describe it for you. This mountain range has 500 distinct mountain peaks over 12,000 feet high. And because of these heights and the closeness, it's that last 100 miles, the proximity to the Pacific Ocean, this particular mountain range receives way more snow than most ranges in North America. The eastern side of the range, which is called the Sierra Escarpment, is notoriously steep. And so after a wagon train left Independence, Missouri for Oregon or for California, the timing was crucial to ensure that the wagon train would not be bogged down by mud created by spring rains or by massive snow drifts in the mountains, which occurred from September. September, when most of us are still wearing shorts and flip-flops. Yeah. And that horses and oxen had enough spring grass to eat. Very crucial timing. You got to have the food. You got to watch out for the mud because it's steep. Notice that I didn't say steep. I said steep. Much like I would say cannibalism, which I will say again here in a few moments. And so it was, in the spring of 1846, almost 500 wagons headed west from Independence, Missouri. At the very back of the train, the very back of this 500-strong wagon train, a group of 9 wagons containing 32 members of the Reed and Donner families. And their employees. Their employees kept with them too, because they needed their employees. These were not poor people. These were people that had some cash. They had a little scratch. They had some greenbacks. Mean green. Dead presidents. People of means. Well, they left on May the 12th. And I'm currently showing you, sorry, audio podcast listeners, James and Margaret Reed, the head of the Reed family. Okay, so it was the Donner family and the Reed family. George Donner at the time was about 60 years old. Yeah. And he was living near Springfield, Illinois. And with him were his 44-year-old wife, Tamsin, and their 3 daughters. Frances, age 6, Georgia, age 4, Eliza, age 3, and, of course, George's daughters from a previous marriage, Aletha, 14, Leanna, 12. So if you can do the math, I can count these people up. I was going to have a ding sound effect, but I thought that would be in bad taste because it sounds a little like a dinner bell, in which case it actually was. But so you got George, Tamsin, the 3 daughters, and the 2 daughters from a previous marriage, and then also his younger brother Jacob with his wife Elizabeth and his stepson Solomon and William Hook and 5 children. We're looking like at 20 people just in the Donner party. Also traveling with the Donner brothers were Teamsters Hiram O. Miller, 29, Samuel Shoemaker, 25, Nora James, 16, Charles Berger, 30, John Denton, 28, August Spitzer, age 30. James Reed, of course, was joined by his wife Margaret, his stepdaughter Virginia, his daughter Martha Jane, Patty, 8, sons James and Thomas, 5 and 3. Sarah Keyes also joined, Margaret's mother. And to make things worse, Sarah Keyes was in the advanced stages of tuberculosis. And she, some would say mercifully, died at a campsite that they called Alcove Springs. She was buried off to the side of the trail. Had they known, they'd have taken her with them as sort of an appetizer. She was 70 years old. I don't know how they expected her to make the trip anyway, but in addition to leaving their financial worries behind, James Reed hoped that California's climate would help his wife Margaret, who had long suffered from ill health. The Reeds hired 3 men to drive the ox teams: Milt Elliott, 28, James Smith, 25, Walter Heron, 25, Bayless Williams, 24, went along as his handyman, and his sister Eliza as the family's cook. So they're in the back of this huge 500 wagon train. But within a week of leaving Independence, Missouri, the Reeds and the Donners joined a group of about 50 wagons, kind of led, but not really led, by a guy named William H. Russell. These wagon trains were sometimes very diplomatic, and they would vote on things and things like that. Other times, the leader was very, very much in charge, and in some cases, someone they hired. But in this case, it was just kind of a ragtag group of people that said, this guy kind of knows what he kind of is the leader, but he's not pushy about it, whatever. Now, by June 16th, these people had traveled 450 miles, and they had about 200 miles to go before they reached Fort Laramie. They'd been delayed by rain and a river that was overflowing, but Tamsen Donner wrote to a friend in Springfield, Illinois, "Indeed, if I do not experience something far worse than I have yet done, I shall say the trouble is all in getting started." Young Virginia Reed recalled years later that the first part of the trip was fine. She was perfectly happy. Now, to make things better, I'm just thinking in terms of a diverse menu. Several other families joined the wagon train along the way. Levita Murphy, 37, a widow from Tennessee, headed a family of 13. I'm not reading all these names. I'm sorry. I'm not. Because there's too many people. She had 2 married daughters, and their families came along. You know, I'm not getting it all. Oh, God, do I have to read these names? They might be menu items later. I'll just mention their names later. I don't think anybody's writing them down. By the way, one of the families that joined them was the family of Patrick Breen. And the Breen family consisted of Patrick Breen, 51 years old, right? Farmer from Iowa, his wife Peggy, and their 7 children. Their neighbor, Patrick Dolan, traveled with them. A German immigrant named Louis Keysberg joined, along with his wife, Elizabeth Philippine, and daughter, Ada. And they had a son, Louis Jr., that was born on the trail. Can I just point out to you, first of all, is it not crazy to take your wife and kids, especially small children, on a trip like this? But even so, people did it. It was considered commonplace. But you would have people, 4 to 6 months, people would die and be born on the trip. Two single younger men named Spitzer and Reinhardt traveled with another German couple, the Wolfingers, who were thought to be wealthy, just a rumor. Then they hired a driver, Dutch Charlie Berger. Yeah, folks, I'm Dutch Charlie Berger. Where do I get my reins? An older man named Hardcoop rode with them. Luke Halloran, a young man with, tuberculosis, could no longer ride horseback, and the families that he'd been traveling with no longer had resources to care for him, but he was taken in by George Donner at the Little Sandy River, and he rode in their wagon. Yeah. By the way, like, share, subscribe, retweet, notification bell. Man, it would really help us out. The algorithm has been just giving us a boot to the groin with steel-toed shoes for the last 2 weeks. It would really help. It would really help. Butterdick Jones says, Tom, my fiance Elise was puzzled about the Saving the Dead reference until I informed her on some historical knowledge about the Donner Party. Yeah, they didn't have Ziploc bags back then. What's for Donner, says Terry Nee. Donner for dinner tonight, Terry. People are greeting Terry Nee. We do have the most cheerful chat room on the internet, is verified by independent sources. Good to see you, pal. Wolfingers and Ladyfingers were very popular at the Donner Party. I just came up with that one. Thank you. Really, no, thank you. Anyway, to promote his new route, which they called the Hastings Cutoff. This is a sign of the Hastings Cutoff to this day near Pilot Peak, Nevada. Lansford Hastings sent riders to deliver letters to traveling migrants. It wasn't enough for him to just produce this stupid book and get people in big trouble. He had riders going out and sending them letters. And on July the 12th, the Reeds and the Donners were given one of these letters. Hastings warned the migrants they could expect opposition from the Mexican authorities in California and advised them to band together in large groups. He also claimed to have worked out a new and better road to California and said that he would be waiting at Fort Bridger. Remember Fort Bridger? That little tiny dot of nothing supply place? Yeah. He would be waiting there to guide the migrants along the new cutoff. Yeah. He's doing you favors left and right. Can you dig it? So on July 20th, at the Little Sandy River, most of the wagon train opted to follow the established trail, the one everyone followed, via Fort Hall. Now, Fort Hall doesn't exist anymore. And sorry, audio podcast listeners, I'm currently showing a picture of a vast field with mountains in the background and a tiny marker where Fort Hall was. Again, out in the middle of completely nowhere. A smaller group. Now, most people said, we're going to take the regular route. We're not experimenting around with this Lansford Hastings thing. A smaller group opted to head for Fort Bridger, and they needed a leader. Now, here's the thing. These people didn't know the route that they were choosing was actually 125 miles longer, which, to be honest, if it was 125 miles longer, but it was easier miles, that might have been a viable option, but that wasn't what it really was. So James Reed, you remember James Reed, right? He had military experience, but he had a very dig me, I'm in charge here attitude, and that rubbed lots of people the wrong way. They thought he was imperious and dictatorial, aristocratic. They did not like him at all. And by comparison, George Donner was very peaceful and charitable. Remember, he took in tuberculosis guy, and he was experienced too. He was an older guy. Now, the members of this party were comfortably well off by the standards of the day. And therefore, most of them were inexperienced in long, difficult overland travel. Plus, being well off and not having done a lot of this stuff, they didn't know how to deal with Native Americans, which they referred to at the time as Injuns. Injuns. Yeah. Terry Nee is asking if he can mail me a forever stamp rather than a super chat. I have so many, bought at 42 cents. Terry, you can do whatever you need to do. Why don't you wait till I move? It might not get here while I'm still here. Now, here's an important thing that happened. There was a journalist named Edwin Bryant, and he reached Black's Fork, where Fort Bridger was, a week ahead of the Donner Party. He saw the first part of the trail and was concerned that it would be difficult for the wagons in the Donner group, especially because they had so many women and children. Women and children, even if they get out of the wagon, aren't going to be help, because sometimes they would have to push the wagon to help the horses and stuff. Women and children aren't going to be good at that. And then, they're women and children. They're just women and children, okay? He returned to Black's Fork to receive and leave letters of warning, warning several members of the group, don't take Hastings' shortcut. Don't do that. That's a bad mistake. Extremely bad mistake. This, I'm showing audio podcast people, is a booklet that Edward Bryant had written called What I Saw in California, Journal of a Tour, which was not really the same thing as a guide and stuff, but it did detail a lot of the hardships of getting to California. By the time the Donner Party reached Black's Fork on July 27th, Hastings had already left. Now remember, he had promised to be there to help them. He's already gone. He led 40 wagons of another group called the Harlan Young Group. And because Jim Bridger's trading post would fare substantially better if people used the Hastings cutoff, because he was on that route, Bridger told the party that the shortcut was a smooth trip, devoid of rugged country and hostile Native Americans. And it would shorten their journey by 350 miles. Now, keep in mind, Jim Bridger, although a famous mountain man and explorer and all that stuff, he's still a guy from the 1840s. He's looking to get money. And he, like Lansford Hastings, had no problem misleading these people. He said water would be easy to find along the way. Although a couple of days crossing a 30 to 40 mile dry lake bed would be necessary. Please keep those figures in mind later. They'll become important. Guido Samurai said, give them booze, the engines, I mean. There's no engines? Oh, the engines, I got you. Terry Nee says, children are a pain. CIA says the Jim Reeve could have been a good Arsenal manager from the sounds of it. Oh, yes, imperious, dictatorial, oblivious. In the face of disaster, insisting everything is great. I'm sorry, Arsenal's third team ought to be able to spank Southampton. I am so sorry. Anyway, seems like it would have been easier to sail around South America. That, too, Guido, was extremely long trip and not great. But so Reed was very impressed with all this information, really what you and I would call misinformation, and advocated taking the Hastings cutoff. None of the party received those letters from Bryant, the journalist, that said, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And in his diary account, Bryant states his conviction that Bridger deliberately concealed the letters. And that's a view shared by Reed in his later testimony. At Fort Laramie, remember Fort Laramie? Sure you do. Reed met an old friend named James Kleiman, who was coming back from California, and Kleiman warned Reed, do not take the Hastings cutoff. The wagons will not be able to make it, and Hastings information is inaccurate. Don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Don't go to bed with no price on your head. Don't do it. Fellow pioneer Jesse Quinn Thornton traveled part of the way with Donner and Reed, and in his book From Oregon to California in 1848, declared Hastings the great swindler of travelers in these countries. Tamsin Donner, the wife of George Donner, according to Thornton, was gloomy, sad, and dispirited at the thought of turning off the main trail on the advice of Hastings, whom she considered a selfish adventurer, and she was right. But on July 31st, 1846, the Donner Party left Black's Fork after 4 days of rest and wagon repairs, 11 days behind the leading Harlan Young group that Hastings was leading. Donner hired a replacement driver, and the company was joined by the McCutcheon family. How lucky were they to join them right before? Anyway, William, 30, his wife Amanda, 24, and their 2-year-old daughter Harriet, and a 16-year-old named Jean-Baptiste Trudeau from New Mexico, who claimed to have knowledge of the Native Americans and the terrain on the way to California. The party turned south to follow the Hastings cutoff. Within days, they found the terrain much more difficult than what was described. Drivers were forced to lock the wheels of their wagons to prevent them from rolling down steep inclines. Years of traffic on the main trail had left an easy and obvious path, whereas the cutoff was much more difficult to find. But, you know, Lansford Hastings wasn't a complete jerk. He wrote directions and left letters stuck to trees. Who among you, if I said, hey, you want to get out to where I'm moving in a week to 10 days from now? One of the most remote parts of the United States, a 2,500 square mile area with 2,400 people. The largest town has 600 people in it. Would you like to know how to get there? No problem. I'll leave you some letters stuck to trees. Or in this instance, highway signs, if you want to go the automobile route. On August 6th, the party found a letter from Hastings advising them to stop until he could show them an alternate route taken by the Harlan Young party. Harlan and Young being two different families. And that's the party he's leading now. So get this. Lansford Hastings actually left them a note that said, you know the way that I told you that was the best way ever to go? That you took a turnoff from the main trail to take that way? Yeah. You wait here because now I have a better way. They encountered exceedingly difficult canyons where boulders had to be moved, walls cut off precariously to a river below, a route likely to break wagons. In his letter, Hastings had offered to guide the Donner Party around the more difficult areas, but he rode back only part way, indicating the general direction to follow. Yeah, kind of go over that way. Yeah, you'll be fine. Just go over that way. Hey, I know you're up on the side of a mountain and all of a sudden the trail stops and you could fall into the thing, but seriously, just kind of keep going that direction. A couple members stopped to rest, and Reed returned alone to the group, arriving 4 days after their departure. Without the guide they'd been promised, the group had to decide whether to turn back and rejoin the traditional trail, following the tracks, or follow the tracks left by the Harlan Young party through the difficult terrain of the Weber Canyon, or forge their own trail. Let's just do our own thing in the nebulous direction that Hastings had recommended. We could just forge our own trail with his just go that way suggestion. Now remember, these wagon trains average 15 miles a day. Well, it was at this time, due to the lack of any real legitimate directions they'd been given, their progress slowed to about 1.5 miles a day. 10 times slower. All able-bodied men were required to clear brush, cut down trees, and heave rocks, big ones, to make room for the wagons. As the Donners continued to make their way across the Wasatch Mountains, the Wasatch. When you drive south from Salt Lake, the Wasatch are all along the side of the route. They're giant. They are giant. It's part of the Rocky Mountains. Anyway, the Graves family, who had set off to find the Donner Party. Some people said, hey, these people left. You might want to go try and find them. They know of this secret route. They consisted of Franklin Ward Graves, his wife Elizabeth. Franklin Ward Graves, by the way, 57, which is really old for the 1840s. His wife's 45, which is getting up there. They had children, a daughter that was 20, a son that was 18, and Eleanor, their daughter, 15. They had a bunch of kids. They had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 kids, one of whom was married, and her son-in-law came along with them, along with a 25-year-old teamster named John Snyder, traveling in 3 wagons. Their arrival brought the Donner Party to 87 members in 60 to 80 wagons. The Graves family had been part of the last group to leave Missouri. Why is that important? Well, this confirms the Donner Party was at the back of that year's Western travels. In other words, remember that window of time they have to get across the mountains and all that? The Donner Party, because of all this back and forth and bad routes and this and that, they are at the very back edge of people who would even try to make this trip. And it was August 20th by the time they reached a point in the mountains where they could actually see the Great Salt Lake. Okay. It took almost another 2 weeks to travel out of the Wasatch Range. So they see the Great Salt Lake. They're like, yay, Great Salt Lake. 2 weeks to get out of the Wasatch Range after they see the Great Salt Lake. By the way, this is a place called Donner Hill. This is a guy named Charles Stanton that I had mentioned earlier. This is Weber Canyon. Remember when I said they were having trouble getting through Weber Canyon? This is years later when they were trying to build a train rail across Weber Canyon. But if you can look at that canyon and imagine taking wagons through it, I think you can figure out, yeah, there's the Great Salt Lake again. The men by this point had begun arguing, and doubts were being expressed about the wisdom of the people who had chosen this route. And a lot of the blame was falling on James Reed. A lot of it. A lot of people were like, well, what's this Hunyuk thinking? This is awful. Whose idea was this? This was dumb. Food and supplies began to run out for some of the less affluent families because everybody was bringing their own food, you know. It wasn't like there was just a big food wagon. No. if you didn't have a lot of money and there was, 60 wagons, some of the people were striking out to find a fortune. They didn't have one. So they were running out of food, those people. Charles Stanton and another man had ridden out with Reed, but had become lost on their way back. And by the time they were found, they were 1 day away from foreshadowing eating their horses. They were planning on eating their horses. Yeah. And they didn't even have 2 slices of bread to make a horse sandwich. They were just going to just kind of fillets, I guess. I don't know. Remember the tuberculosis guy, Luke Halloran? Well, he died of tuberculosis on August 25th. And a few days later, the party stumbled across yet another of these genius tacked-to-a-tree letters from Lansford Hastings. And the letter, by the way, was all ripped to shreds by the wind and elements. The pieces of the letter that they were able to cobble together said they were 2 days and 2 nights of difficult travel ahead that wouldn't provide them any grass or any water, but just you'd have to forego it for 2 days and nights. So the party rested their oxen and prepared for the trip. After 36 hours, they set off to try to get over a 1,000-foot mountain in their path. And from the peak of this mountain, they saw what was ahead of them. A dry, barren plain, perfectly flat and covered with white salt, larger than the one than they had just crossed that took 2 days. According to one of the travelers, it was one of the most inhospitable places on earth. Their oxen were already fatigued and their water was nearly gone. These are salt flats, ladies and gentlemen. You are traveling across hard, flat salt. When the wind blows, any dust that blows up is salt. The Donner Party pressed onward until August 30th because they couldn't do anything else. In the heat of the day, the moisture underneath the salt, the crust of the salt, rose to the surface and turned that dry, barren plain into a gummy, gluey coating on the top. The wagon wheels sank into it, in some cases up to the hubs. The days were blisteringly hot, and on the nights, it became frigid, frozen, awful. Several of the group saw visions of lakes and wagon trains and believed they had finally caught up to the evil Lansford Hastings, but they hadn't. After 3 days, the water was gone, and some of the party removed their own oxen from the wagons to press ahead to find more water. They were like, I'm leaving the wagon, I'm taking the ox, because, an ox is a great thing to go traveling around to try and find water on, right? Fast moving, certainly an animal that doesn't need lots of food and water to survive, Some of the animals were so weakened that they were left yoked to the wagons and just abandoned. Hey, can we ride with you? We're just going to leave our ride here. 9 of Reed's 10 oxen broke free because they were crazed with thirst, and they bolted off into the desert, never to be seen again. Why is this important? I'll tell you later when people start eating each other. 9 oxen could have really come in handy back then, right? The journey also irreparably damaged some of the wagons. They simply would never be able to be repaired. But on the bright side, no human lives were lost, or no future meals were lost. Instead of the promised 2-day journey over 40 miles, the journey across 80 miles of the Great Salt Lake Desert took 6 days. 6. Let's see some of your comments here. Terry Nee says they were trolled. Yeah, they were trolled. Tom, I sent you a picture, but I know you can't put it up during the show, but it's funny relating to your topic. Terry Nee says, do you know the way to San Jose? I've been away so long, so very long. Jeannie says, make 3 nights, so no lefts. You guys will be make 3 rights, no lefts. You guys will be okay. Tim Jenkinson says, I bet they didn't break any speed records with those wagons at Salt Lake. Oh, no. Damn, this is more crazy than Japanese game shows. What the heck is this? Randy sent me a picture of it looks like I don't know what the hell it is. Oh, that's ox. That's some kind of a bone that's been cut down in the middle. It's an ox marrow thing or something. That is funny. Coach Mike Rodick said, if you've ever been to Golden Corral, same meat. They could have used that salt for Donner. They really could have. I was going to point that out, Terry. Thank you for pointing that out. They really could have helped that salt. That salt would have come in handy later on. You know, by this time, let me just show the Great Salt Lake again. By this time, none of the party had any remaining faith in the Hastings cutoff. They were like, forget this. And they recovered from their grueling, arduous trip on this in some springs on the other side of the desert. They spent several days trying to recover cattle and retrieve the wagons left in the desert and transfer their food and supplies to other wagons. They were consolidating at this point. Reed's family incurred the heaviest losses. And maybe rightfully so. He's the jerk that was way in favor of this route. Reed, though, became more assertive, asking all the families to submit an inventory of their goods and food to him. To him. Now that he's in trouble. Reed suggested that 2 men should go to Sutter's Fort in California. He had heard that John Sutter was exceedingly generous to wayward pioneers. Okay? And that he would assist them with extra provisions. He, after all, established Sutter's Fort, what would later become Sacramento. Charles Stanton and William McCutcheon volunteered to undertake the dangerous trip. You know, the 2 guys that got lost and almost had to eat their horses. Yeah, those guys. The remaining serviceable wagons were pulled by mongrel teams of cows, oxen, and mules. It was in the middle of September, and 2 young men who went in search of missing oxen reported, hey, we've got 40 more miles of desert ahead. These cattle and oxen were now exhausted, and they were lean. They were not, they were skinny, and you could see their rib cages and all that stuff. But the Donner Party crossed the next stretch of desert relatively unscathed. Their journey started to get easier, particularly through the next valley, through the Ruby Mountains. Now, sorry, audio podcast listeners, but look at these mountains. Does it look like an easy journey to you? I don't think it does to me. Despite their, burning an intense hatred by this point of Lansford Hastings, they didn't have any choice but to follow his tracks, which by this point, because he had just took off, were weeks old. On September 26, 2 months after embarking on just the cutoff, the party rejoined the traditional trail along a stream that became known as the Humboldt River. The shortcut had probably delayed them by a month, to say nothing of what it had cost them in supplies and water and oxen and the health of the oxen and all the rest. Well, along the Humboldt River, the group met Paiute Indians, Native Americans, who joined them for a couple of days, but yeah, they stole or shot several oxen and horses. And by now, it's well into October. Remember how they were supposed to make it through by September? Yeah, it's October now. The Donner family split off to make better time. They thought that if we separate, maybe we can make better time. 2 wagons in the remaining group became tangled, and John Snyder angrily beat the ox of Reed's hired teamster, Milt Elliott. When Reed intervened, Snyder rained blows onto his head with a whip handle. And when Reed's wife attempted to intervene, she got a little taste herself. Yeah, they weren't messing around. They also smacked her around. Reed retaliated, of course, by fatally stabbing Snyder. Well, that evening, all the witnesses got together to decide what should be done. American laws didn't exist west of the Continental Divide. That was Mexican territory. And wagon trains were into vigilante justice. They did it themselves. But George Donner, the party's leader, was a full day ahead of the main wagon. Remember, they had split up, and he's with his family now. Snyder had been seen to hit Reed, and other people said, yeah, he hit his wife too. Except here's the problem with vigilante justice. Snyder was popular, and everybody hated Reed's guts. So Keseberg, remember Keseberg, the German immigrant guy, Keseberg? Remember him? Got a big beard, Germany-looking kind of guy. You don't remember him? Let me see if I can find him. He's here somewhere in my photos. Oh, there he is. He suggested that Reed should be hanged. But an eventual compromise allowed Reed to leave the camp without his family, who were to be taken care of by others. So it's like, you go, your family can stay with us, but you're banished. He departed alone the next morning, unarmed, but his stepdaughter Virginia rode ahead and secretly provided him with a rifle and some food. The trials and tribulations that the Donner Party had experienced so far. Let's say that we stopped our story right here. It would really suck. It would really be an awful tale, right? All of the stuff that they went through resulted in these groups splintering up. Like, these people thought this was a good idea. They were not a contiguous group of people with the same beliefs and goals anymore. They were tiny little groups with a lot of picadillos and hatreds amongst their fellow travelers and stuff. By the way, like, share, subscribe, retweet, notification bell. Man, we need those likes and shares so much. You're popular. People like you. You know, you're well respected in your group of people both online and off. If you share the show, it'll help us out a lot. Anyway, everybody's distrustful. Everybody's looking out for themselves. Grass was becoming very, very scarce. The animals were getting weaker and weaker and weaker. And to relieve the load of the animals, everyone was expected to walk instead of riding the wagons. Keysburg ejected that guy named Hardcoop from his wagon, telling the elderly man he had to walk or die. It's a very German thing to say to somebody, isn't it? You must get off the wagon and walk or die. A few days later, Hardcoop sat next to a stream, his feet so swollen they had split open, and he was never seen again. William Eddy pleaded with the others to find him, but they all refused, swearing they would waste no more resources on a man almost 70 years old. Basically, they went, boomer. Anyway, Reed caught up with the Donners and proceeded with one of his teamsters, Walter Heron. Those two shared a horse and were able to cover about 25 to 45 miles per day. The rest of the party joined the Donners, who, remember, were up ahead, but things didn't get any better. Native Americans chased away all of the Graves family's horses, and another wagon was left behind. With grass in short supply, the cattle spread out more. They went further to find grass, and that allowed the Paiutes to steal 18 more of their cattle during one evening. Several mornings later, they shot another 21 of the cattle. So far, the party had lost nearly 100 oxen and cattle, and their rations were almost completely depleted. You know what would have come in handy? Some cattle. I've heard they're tasty. Anyway, with nearly all his cattle gone, Wolfinger stopped at a place called the Humboldt Sink to bury his wagon. He wasn't burying it like to destroy it. He was burying it to come and get later. Reinhardt and Spitzer stayed behind to help. They returned without him, reporting that he had been attacked by Paiutes and he'd been killed while they were doing this. One more stretch of desert was ahead of them. The Eddy's oxen had been killed by Native Americans, and they were forced to abandon their wagon. The family had eaten everything they had, but other families refused to assist their children. The Eddies were forced to walk, carrying their children and miserable with thirst. Margaret Reed and her children were also now without a wagon. But the desert came to an end, and the party found the Truckee River in beautiful, lush country. But the party had almost no time to rest. They pressed on to cross the Sierra Nevada before the snows came. Charles Stanton, one of the men who had left a month earlier to seek assistance in California at the Sutter's Fort, found the company, and he brought mules and food from Sutter's Fort and 2 Native American guides employed by John Sutter. They were from a tribe called Miwok, and these Miwok men from the Consumnes River were known by their Catholic baptismal names, Louis and Salvador. Stanton also brought news that Reed and Heron, 2 other men that had left, although haggard and starving, had reached Sutter's Fort. By this point, according to one of the travelers, to the bedraggled, half-starved members of the Donner Party, it must have seemed that the worst of their problems had passed. Guess what? I'm just getting warmed up. Faced with one last push over the mountains. Mountains, by the way, that were described as much worse than the Wasatch Range. The Donner Party had decided whether to forge ahead or rest their cattle. It was October 20th, and they had heard at Sutter's Fort that the pass, known today as the Donner Pass, which, oh, you're one of the Donners? I'll pass, would not be snowed in until the middle of November, which is, we got plenty of time. William Pike was killed when a gun being loaded by William Foster was discharged negligently, an event that seemed to make the decision for them. Family by family, they resumed their journey. First the Breens, then the Keysburgs, then the Stantons with the Reeds and the Graves and the Murphys, and the Donners traveled last. After a few miles of rough terrain, an axle broke on one of their wagons. Jacob and George went into the woods to fashion a replacement, which is something people did back then. It's, I'll just fashion a replacement for this axle. George Donner sliced his hand open, while chiseling the wood, but it seemed to be a superficial wound. Later, it would be called an appetizer. Don't you know? Let's see here. In our chat room, Tim Jenkins says, did they ever make a movie about this? Yes, it's called Sleepless in Seattle. No, I mean, I don't. There is a made-for-TV movie about it, at least I know. I've seen it. Gene Genie says, if they just used MapQuest, this never would have happened. True. Tim Jenkins says that this is an amazing story. If it's not a movie, it should be. There is at least a made-for-TV film about it that I have actually seen. And it's a movie. You might, it might not be a surprise to you. Not that much fun. It's not a feel-good. It's not a rom-com. Anyway, at this point, snow begins to fall. The Breens made it up the massive, nearly vertical slope, 1,000 feet, to a place called Truckee Lake, now known as Donner Lake, 3 miles from the pass summit. And they camped near a cabin that had been built 2 years earlier by the members of another party. Okay. Donner Lake. It was built by some members of the Stevens, Townsend, Murphy party. There's Elisha Stevens. There's Martin Murphy. The Eddies and Keysburgs joined the Breens, attempting to make it over the pass, but they found 5 to 10-foot snow drifts and were unable to find the trail. They turned back for Truckee Lake, and within a day, all of the families were camped there, except for the Donners, who were 5 miles, a half-day's journey below them. And here, sorry audio podcast listeners, here is a map of the position they found themselves in. It was the Murphy cabin, the Breen cabin, the Graves Reed cabin, and then far below them was the Donner camp. And so they decided to establish camps for the winter. 60 members and associates of the Breen, Graves, Reed, Murphy, Keysburg, and Eddy families set up for the winter at Truckee Lake. 3 widely separated cabins of pine logs served as their homes, with dirt floors and poorly constructed flat roofs that leaked when it rained. The Breens occupied one cabin, the Eddies and Murphys another, and the Reeds and Graves the third. Keysburg built a lean-to for his family against the side of the Breen cabin. Good job. Good thinking. The families used canvas or oxhide to patch the faulty roofs. Cabins had no windows or doors, only large holes to allow entry. Of the 60 people at Truckee Lake, 19 were men over the age of 18, 12 were women, and 29 were children, 6 of whom were toddlers or younger. Farther down the trail, closer to Alder Creek, the Donner families hastily constructed tents to house 21 people, including Mrs. Wolfinger and the Donner's drivers, 6 men, 3 women, 12 children in all. It began to snow again on the evening of March 4th. But the snow would pass and everything would eventually, I'm just kidding, it was an 8-day snowstorm. 8 days. 8. By the time the party made camp, very little food remained from the supplies that Stanton had brought back from Sutter's Fort. The ox began to die, and their carcasses were frozen and stacked. Truckee Lake was not yet frozen, but the pioneers were unfamiliar with catching lake trout. Eddie, the most experienced hunter, killed a bear, but had little luck after that. The Reed and Eddie families had lost almost everything. Margaret Reed promised to pay double when they got to California for the use of 3 oxen from the Graves and Breen families. Graves charged Eddie $25, normally the cost of 2 healthy oxen, for the carcass of an ox that had been starved to death. Desperation grew in the camp, and some reasoned that individuals might succeed in navigating the pass where wagons could not. In small groups, they made several attempts, but each time they returned defeated. Another severe storm, lasting about a week, covered the area so deeply that the cattle and the horses, their only remaining food, died and were lost in the snow. Patrick Breen began keeping a diary on November 20th. He concerned himself primarily with the weather, marking the storms and how much snow had fallen, but gradually began to include other references in his entries. Life at Truckee Lake was miserable. The cabins were cramped and filthy. It snowed so much that people were unable to go outdoors for days. Diets soon consisted of oxhide, strips of which were boiled to make a disagreeable glue-like jelly. Ox and horse bones were boiled repeatedly to make soup, and they became so brittle they would crumble upon chewing. Sometimes they were softened by being charred and eaten. Bit by bit, the Murphy children picked apart the oxhide rug that lay in front of their fireplace, roasted it, and ate it. After a party set out on makeshift snowshoes in an attempt to cross the mountain pass, 2/3 of those remaining at Truckee Lake were children. Mrs. Graves took charge of 8. Lavinia Murphy and Eleanor Eddy took care of 9. Migrants caught and ate mice that strayed into their cabins. Many soon weakened and spent most of their time in bed. Occasionally, one would be able to make the full-day trek to see the Donners. News came that Jacob Donner and 3 hired men had died. One of them, Joseph Reinhardt, confessed on his deathbed that he had murdered Wolfinger. Remember, the guy that was going to bury his wagon? And they came back and said the Indians got him? Yeah, one of the guys went, nah, I really did then. George Donner's hand, remember, he cut it trying to fashion an axle, become infected, which left only 4 men to work at the Donner camp. Margaret Reed had managed to save enough food for a Christmas pot of soup to the delight of her children, but by January they were facing starvation. and considered eating the ox hides that had served as their roof. Does this sound like fun to you? Anybody? Sound like a good time? Does it sound like... it doesn't really? Margaret Reed, Virginia Reed, Milt Elliott, and the servant girl Eliza Williams attempted to walk out, reasoning it would be better to try to bring food back than to sit and watch the children starve. They were gone for 4 days in the snow before they had to turn back, and the cabin by now was uninhabitable. The oxhide roof served as their food supply, and the family moved in with the Breens. The servants went to live with other families. One day, the Graveses came by to collect on the debt owed by the Reeves and took 6 ox hides. All the family had to eat. By the way, oxhide is leather. Are we all clear on that? They're eating boiled leather. Then came something called the Forlorn Hope. The mountain party at Truckee Lake began to fail, as if it already hadn't. Augustus Spitzer and Bayless Williams, a driver for the Reeds, died more from malnutrition than from starvation. Franklin Graves fashioned 14 pairs of snowshoes out of ox bows and hide. On December 16th, a party of 17 men, women, and children set out on foot in an attempt to cross the mountain pass. As evidence of how grim their choices were, 4 of these men were fathers. 3 of the women who were mothers gave their young children to other women. They packed lightly, taking what had become 6-day rations, a rifle, a blanket each, a hatchet, and some pistols, hoping to make their way to Bear Valley. Historian Charles McGlashan, Chuck, we call him, Charles McGlashan, later called this snowshoe party the Forlorn Hope. 2 of those without snowshoes, Charles Berger and 10-year-old William Murphy, turned back early on. Other members of the party fashioned snowshoes for 12-year-old Lemuel Murphy on the first evening from one of the pack saddles they were carrying. The snowshoes proved to be awkward but effective on the arduous climb. Members of the party were neither well-nourished nor accustomed to camping in snow 12 feet deep. And by the 3rd day, most of the party was snowblind. You know what snowblind is, kids? It's called photokeratasis or ultraviolet keratasis. It's a painful eye condition caused by exposure of insufficiently protected eyes to the ultraviolet rays from natural or artificial sources. It's basically sunburn of the cornea and the eye, and you get it in snow because snow provides that blinding, reflective white light that is inescapable. On the 6th day, Eddie discovered his wife had hidden a half a pound of bear meat in his pack. The group set out again in the morning of December 21st. Stanton had been straggling for several days, and he remained behind, saying he would follow shortly. His remains were found at that location the following spring. The group became lost and confused. After 2 more days without food, Patrick Dolan proposed one of them should volunteer to die in order to feed the others. Now you're thinking. Some suggested a duel, while another account describes an attempt at a lottery. Eddie suggested they keep moving until someone simply fell, but a blizzard forced the group to halt. Antonio, the animal handler, was the first to die. Franklin Graves was the next casualty. As the blizzard progressed, Dolan began to rant deliriously, absolutely deliriously. He stripped off his clothes and ran into the woods. This is a clear sign of hypothermia. He returned shortly afterwards and died a few hours later. Not long after, possibly because Murphy was near death, some of the group began to eat the flesh from Dolan's body. Lemuel's sister Sarah tried to feed him some, but he died shortly afterwards. Eddie, Salvador, and Luis refused to eat. The next morning, the group was busied itself stripping the muscle and organs from the bodies of Antonio, Dolan, Graves, and Mercy. They drive them to store for the days ahead, taking care to ensure nobody would have to eat his or her relatives, because that would be wrong. That would be wrong. After 3 days' rest, they set off again, searching for the trail. Eddie eventually succumbed to his hunger and ate human flesh, but that was soon gone. Without Hamburger Helper or rice, or you just can't extend a meal of human the way that you really want to. Potatoes, something, bread. They began taking apart their snowshoes to eat the oxhide webbing and discussed murdering Luis and Salvador for food. Eddie warned the two men, and they quietly left, which, as you would. Jay Fosdick died during the night, leaving only 7 members of the party. Eddie and Mary Graves left to hunt, but when they returned with deer meat, Fosdick's body had already been cut apart for food. It's like, hey, we were going out for drive-thru. What? Come on, man. Anyway, after several more days, 25 since they had left Truckee Lake, they came across Salvador and Luis, who had not eaten for about 9 days and were probably close to death. William Foster shot both men, thus realizing his plans from before they left. Their bodies were butchered and their flesh dried for consumption. Though murder wasn't kept secret, Kristen Johnson notes, Foster was not greatly blamed for it and spent the rest of his life without being troubled by the authorities. Not more than a few days later, the group stumbled into a Native American settlement looking so deteriorated that the camp's inhabitants initially fled. The Native Americans gave them what they had to eat: acorns, grass, pine nuts. After a few days, Eddie continued on with the help of tribe members to a ranch in a small farming community at the edge of the Sacramento Valley. A hurriedly assembled rescue party found the other 6 survivors on January 17th. Their journey from Truckee Lake had taken 33 days. Now it was time for a rescue attempt. James Reed made it out of the Sierra Nevada to Rancho Johnson in late October. He was safe, and recovering at Sutter's Fort, but each day he became more concerned for the fate of his family and friends. He pleaded with Colonel John C. Fremont. Colonel John C. Fremont to gather a team of men to cross the pass and try to rescue their party. In return, Reed promised to join Fremont's forces and fight in the Mexican-American War. Like you would, right? Like anybody would. He was joined by McCutcheon, who had been able to return with Stanton, and as well as some members of the Harlan Young Party. The Harlan Young wagon train arrived at Sutter's Fort on October 8th, the last to make it over the Sierra Nevada that season. The party of roughly 30 horses and a dozen men carried food supplies and expected to find the Donner Party on the western side of the mountain along the Bear River on the approach to Emigrant Gap. perhaps starving, but alive. And when they arrived in the river valley, they found only a migrant couple who had been separated from their company and been starving. 2 guides deserted Reed and McCutcheon with some of their horses, but they pressed on farther up the valley to a place called Yuma Bottoms, walking the last mile on foot. Reed and McCutcheon stood looking up at Emigrant Gap, which I'm showing you now. Sorry, audio podcast people. Only 12 miles from the top, blocked by snow. Possibly on the same day, the Breenes attempted to lead one last effort to get over it. Despondent, they returned back to Sutter's Fort. Much of the military at the time was involved in a little something called the Mexican-American War at the time. Why, there's the Mexican president now. And the Mexican-American War was taking up most, if not all, of the able-bodied men. So throughout the region, roads were blocked, communications were compromised, supplies unavailable, and only 3 men responded to a call for volunteers to rescue the Donner Party. Reed had to stay in San Jose until February because of these regional uprisings and general confusion. He spent that time speaking with other pioneers and people that had been waylaid and things of that nature. The people of San Jose responded by creating a petition to the United States Navy to assist these stranded people in the Donner Party. 2 newspapers reported that members of the Snowshoe Party had resorted to cannibalism. And I think in today's world, that would reduce the amount of help. Well, back then, they went, no, give them more help. They're eating people. Coach Mike Rodick says finger food, if you will. Tim Jenkinson says it's alive minus the plane. It is. It's alive. And the soccer team. They must have looked like zombies. Yeah, they must have looked really bad. They could have used a shave and a shower, probably a lot of them. Just thinking. Residents of Yerba Buena, a place called Yerba Buena, which would later actually grow into the city of San Francisco. Many of them recent migrants to the West themselves raised $1,300. That'd be about $45,000 today. And they also organized relief efforts to build 2 camps to supply a rescue party for the refugees. A rescue party including William Eddy started on February 4th from the Sacramento Valley. Now remember, this guy had eaten human flesh and managed to make his way through that snowshoe party. Rain and a swollen river forced several delays. Eddy stationed himself at Bear Valley while others made steady progress through the snow and the storms to cross the pass to Truckee Lake. And they did something called caching their food. They would bury food at stations along the way so they didn't have to carry it all. And it would be there on their way back so they could survive on the way back. 3 of the rescue party turned back, but 7 people continued. That 7-man rescue party scaled the Fremont Pass, now known as Donner Pass, and they neared where Eddy told them that these bodies would be. There's the Donner Pass again. Crappy at Life with a very generous $5 super chat. Happy to be here. I like parties. Well, these party favors were made of human beef jerky. How do you like that? Yeah. A haggard Mrs. Murphy appeared from a hole in the snow, stared at them, and asked, "Are you men from California, or do you come from heaven?" The relief party doled out food in small portions, concerned that it might kill them if they overate. All of the cabins were buried in snow. All of them. Soaked oxide roofs had begun to rot, and the smell was overpowering. 13 people at the camps were dead. Their bodies had been loosely buried in snow near the cabin roofs. Some of these people seemed emotionally unstable, go figure. 3 of the rescue party went out to the Donners and brought back 4 emaciated children and 3 adults. Leanna Donner had particular difficulty walking up the steep incline from Alder Creek to Truckee Lake, later writing, "Such pain and misery as I endured that day is beyond description." George Donner's arm, not hand, but arm by this point, was so gangrenous he could not move. 23 people were chosen to go with the rescue party, leaving 21 in the cabins at Truckee Lake and 12 at Alder Creek. So they didn't even take everybody. Okay? Incidentally, let me just show you this picture real quick. Sorry, audio podcast listeners. They cut the trees off at a certain level when the snow got high because they needed wood to burn and stuff. And I'm showing a picture now of the tree stumps that are at least 12 to 15 feet high. That's how much they were buried in the snow. The people that rescued all of these members of the Donner Party, they didn't tell them the fate of the snowshoe party, the forlorn hope that had gotten out of there over that 33-day period. They just said, well, they didn't return because they were frostbitten. Patty and Tommy Reed were very soon too weak to cross the snowdrifts, and nobody was strong enough to carry them. Margaret Reed faced the agonizing predicament of accompanying her 2 older children to Bear Valley and watching her 2 frailest children be taken back to Truckee Lake without a parent. She made rescuer Akia Glover swear on his honor as a Mason that he would return for her children. Patty Reed told her, "Well, Mother, if you never see me again, do the best you can." Ooh, there's a little passive-aggressive, right? Upon their return to the lake, the Breens refused them entry to their cabin, but after Glover left more food, the children were grudgingly admitted. What a bunch of jerks. The rescue party was dismayed to find that the first cast station had been broken into by animals, leaving them without food for 4 days. After struggling on the walk over the pass, John Denton slipped into a coma and died. Ada Keseberg died soon afterwards. Her mother was inconsolable, refusing to let the child's body go. After several days more travel through difficult country, the rescuers grew very concerned that the children would not survive. Some of them were eating the buckskin fringe from one of the rescuers' pants and the shoelaces of another, to the relief party's surprise. Hey, once a kid gets hooked on oxhide and leather stringing, you just can't get them off. On their way down from the mountains, they met the next rescue party, which included James Reed. Upon hearing his voice, Margaret, his wife, sank into the snow, overwhelmed. After those rescued made it safely into Bear Valley, William Hook, Jacob Donner's stepson, broke into food stores and fatally gorged himself. He was so hungry, he broke into some food stores and ate himself to death. The others continued to Sutter's Fort, where Virginia Reed wrote, "I really thought I had stepped over into paradise." She was amused to note that one of the young men asked her to marry him, although she was only 13 and recovering from starvation. She turned him down, which, you know what? Getting turned down by a starved... let's not get into it. Goat Scroat says, "Awesome." The Wolf says, "Nothing tastes as good as shoe leather." Yes, that's a 1/4-inch shoe leather, the sole of a man's boot. Around the time the first relief party was being organized, Nearby California settler and patriarch George C. Yount, who likely had previously heard of the plight of the Donner Party, had very disturbing dreams of a struggling group of starving pioneers in deep snow. Yount, a person called Mariano Guadalupe Vallejo, and others then raised $500 to send out another rescue party, because remember, there's 20 or so people left back at Truckee Lake. They's back there eating rawhides. Oh, and George Donner's gangrenous arm. Which, just to make things worse, was no longer tasty and delicious. On March 1st, a second relief party arrived at Truckee Lake. Now, those rescuers included veteran mountain men, most notably John Turner. And audio podcast listeners, let me just tell you, normally I apologize for the photo. This photo, I apologize to the YouTube viewers, because this is one of the most horrible illustrations I've ever seen in my life. He's a normal mountain man. He's wearing the buckskins, and he's got a long beard, and that's all you need to know. Who accompanied the return of both Reed and McCutcheon. Reed was reunited with his daughter Patty and his weakened son Tommy. An inspection of the Breen cabin found its occupants relatively well, but the Murphy cabin, according to author George R. Stewart, passed the limits of description and almost of imagination. Lavinia Murphy was caring for her 8-year-old son Simon and the 2 young children of William, Eddie, and Foster. She had deteriorated mentally and was nearly blind. The children were listless and had not been cleaned in days. Louis Keysburg had moved in and could barely move due to an injured leg. No one at Truckee Lake had died between the departure of the first and the arrival of the second relief party. Patrick Breen documented a disturbing visit in the last week of February from Mrs. Murphy, who said her family was considering eating Milt Elliott. Reed and McCutcheon found Elliott's mutilated body later on. The Alder Creek camp fared no better. That was predominantly the Donners. The first 2 members of the relief party to reach it saw Trudeau carrying a human leg. When they made their presence known, Trudeau threw it into a hole in the snow that contained mostly dismembered body parts of Jacob Donner. Inside the tent, Elizabeth Donner refused to eat, although her children were being nourished by their father's organs. The rescuers discovered 3 other bodies that had already been consumed. In the other tent, Tamsin Donner was well, but George was very ill because the infection, the gangrene, had reached his shoulder. Now, can I stop down for a second here and just say something? Can I take just a second? If you've been dismembering bodies, and you're good at it, you've been eating them, why wouldn't you cut George Donner's gangrenous arm off? Not to eat. I'm not suggesting that. You know, there's no Ziploc bags around there or anything else. But not to eat, but just to not be quite so ill. You know what I'm saying? Am I crazy? Am I just a practical fella? Am I? Is that just me? Let me get John Turner back up here. All right. The second rescue evacuated 17 migrants from Truckee Lake, only 3 of whom were adults, and mostly children. Both the Breen and the Graves families prepared to go. Only 5 people remained at Truckee Lake. Keysburg, Mrs. Murphy and her son Simon, and the young Eddie and foster children. Tamsin Donner elected to stay with her ailing husband after Reed informed her that a third relief party would arrive soon. Mrs. Donner kept her daughters Eliza, Georgia, and Frances with her. The walk back to Bear Valley was very slow. At one point, Reed sent 2 men ahead to retrieve the first cache of food, expecting the third relief, a small party led by a guy named Selim E. Woodworth, to come at any moment, but a violent blizzard arose after they scaled the pass. 5-year-old Isaac Donner froze to death, and Reed nearly died. Mary Donner's feet were badly burned because they were so frostbitten, she did not realize she was sleeping with them in the fire. Remember back when they got out of the desert and they thought the worst is behind us? Think about how wrong they were. Hey, please do me a favor and like and share and subscribe. You guys are well known as popular people with excellent taste and judgment. And if you share and like, peer pressure will cause lesser individuals to glom on to this program, which is being kicked very hard, as if to cause gangrene, the likes of which George Donner could never experience, in the groin. The groinal region. The algorithm has not been kind to us. The algorithm is kind of like the Lansford Hastings of this story. And I've never done anything to the algorithm. Can we get that out on the open? I've always been a friend to the algorithm. A good friend, by the way. Oh, my goodness. Crappy at Life with another $5 donation. Thank you so much. He says, this doesn't sound like a very good party at all. This Donner guy sucks. Crappy at Life, thank you for your generosity. I very much thank you. We got a lot here, actually, in the chat. Goat Scroat says, oh, I've already been there. Terry Nee says, reminds me of junior high, turned down by the older girls. Yeah, turned down by a starved 13-year-old girl. $500, that's a lot of dough. People saying hi. Terry Nee with an arm emoji. George Donner's arm emoji. Tim Jenkinson says, is that the arm? People saying hi, people saying hi, people saying hi. We do have the most cheerful chat room on the internet. It's verified by independent sources. Crappy at Life says, get a load of Robertson Caruso over here. Legs the best part. Joey C in the house. Ladies and gentlemen, internet royalty, Joseph Catalano himself. Well, always pleased to have a visit from my good friend and fellow member of the Ray Rayner fan club, Joey C. Loves me some Joey C. Ghost Growth says, please be onto the algorithm. Praise be onto the algorithm. Praise be onto the algorithm, the almighty, all-knowing, all-powerful algorithm. Terry Nee says, thank God it doesn't it doesn't have to send my stamps. I'd hate for you to have to part with one of those forever stamps. Anyway, Mary Donner, when we last left our intrepid party, Mary Donner's frostbitten feet had burned in the fire. Somebody came into the tent and said, this place smells like feet. Tim Jenkinson says, they should get Z-list celebrities to recreate the journey for a reality show. Joey C says, thank you, Tom. No. Don't thank me. Thank you. You did all the work. Anybody who doesn't watch Joey C is in trouble. And you know what? Joey C has some people. Let me just get on my soapbox here for a second. Joey C has some people that troll him unmercifully. Now, it doesn't bug Joey C. Joey C's above that. Occasionally, it bugs all of us a little bit. But these people are such losers. And they think what they're doing is significant or effective. And these people are just, they're why I ridicule the Dabbleverse. It's like you are in 6th grade. Nothing that you are doing will matter in 5 minutes. If that's all you've got in your life, you are so lucky they invented an internet to rescue you from your obscurity of being a social outcast and never doing anything of note or worth in your whole life. Dress yourself up as whatever fruit or vegetable or puppet or whatever you have to do to not be yourself, because I know being yourself is the last thing in the world you want to be, because of the cathedral of dung that you have created with your existence. The last thing you would want to be is a person that uses their real name and lives in the light. Say what you want about Joey C. Like myself, he's not perfect. But we do use our real names, don't we? Yeah. Yeah. Last thing these people want to be is who they really are. Last thing anybody would want to be is them. Well, all right, I'm overstating things. The last thing that you would want to be is George Donner's gangrenous arm or any of the people in the Donner Party. I can't deny that. I really can't. But I'm a big Joey C fan, so. CIA says, I can tell you from experience that burning flesh smells like rancid bacon being cooked. Yeah, burning flesh, not a great thing. Crappy Life says, Joe C, I loved your work with Kid Rock. Let me tell you about the punk rock. And then I mix it with the... Anyway. When last we left our intrepid group, Mary Donner's feet had been burned in the fire because they were so frostbitten she couldn't feel them while she was sleeping as they burned in the fire. When the storm passed, the Breen and Graves families were too exhausted and unenthused to move. They hadn't eaten for days. Well, the relief party had no choice but to leave without him. The place where the Breens and Graves had been left began being known as Starved Camp. Hey, you guys going to Starved Camp this summer? Nah, my parents are sending me to Scout Camp. Goats Girl says, I'm a high-functioning alcoholic with crippling cocaine addiction. The internet is a nice little break. It is. It's a refresher. Terry Nee says, I have Joey C's autograph on a vintage Cubs pennant. That's a keepsake. That's a keepsake there. Margaret Breen reportedly took the initiative to try to keep the members of the camp alive after the others departed down the mountain, but Elizabeth Graves and her son Franklin soon perished before the next rescue party could reach them. And what do you think happened next? Anyone? Bueller. Yeah, the rest of the remaining party ate the flesh of their dead bodies to survive. They consumed the human flesh of their friends. Yeah, that's gonna happen. And that's going to happen when you hang around cannibals. That's going to happen. I had another... Was this my Donner Pass picture here? I got another picture of Donner Pass here somewhere that's absolutely awful. Yeah, I'll just leave that one up. That's good enough for the moment. All right, so the three members of the relief party stayed to help those at the remaining camps. Charles Stone stayed at Truckee Lake, Charles Cady and Nicholas Clark at Alder Creek. While Clark was out hunting, Stone traveled to Alder Creek and made plans with Cady to return to California. According to Stewart, Tamsen Donner arranged for them to take her daughters, Eliza, Georgia, and Frances, with them, perhaps for $500 cash. Stone and Cady took the three girls to Truckee Lake, but left them at a cabin with Keysburg and Lavinia Murphy when they started for Bear Valley. Not cool. Cady recalled later that 2 days on the trail they passed the starved camp, but they didn't stop to help anybody. They overtook Reed and the others from that second rescue party within days. Several days later at the Alder Creek camp, Clark and Trudeau agreed to leave for California together. When they reached Truckee Lake and discovered the Donner girls were still there, they returned to Alder Creek to inform Tams and Donner, you know those guys that you were going to give $500 to take your daughters back to California? Yeah, they didn't do that. William Foster and William Eddy, the Bills, let's call them, survivors of the snowshoe party, started from Bear Valley to intercept Reed, taking with them a man named John Stark. A day later, they met Reed helping his children struggle on toward Bear Valley, frostbitten, bleeding, but alive. Desperate to rescue their own children, Foster and Eddy persuaded 4 men with pleading and with money to go back to Truckee Lake with them. During their journey, they found 11 survivors at Starved Camp, huddled around a fire that had sunk into a pit. And at this point, the relief party split, with Foster, Eddy, and 2 others headed toward Truckee Lake. 2 of the rescuers each took a child and headed back to Bear Valley. John Stark refused to leave the others. He picked up 2 children and all the provisions and assisted the remaining Breens and Graves to safety, sometimes advancing the children down the trail piecemeal, putting them down and then going back up to carry other debilitated children. John Stark was a stud. You know what I'm saying? Terry Nee says, I quit Diet Coke in my 40s. Cold turkey? Were you scared straight? Crappy at Life says, and they all lived happily ever after. Terry Nee says, Hackamania will end in a similar way. All this stuff. Think about your life 10 years from now. Is anybody being going, hey, you should have heard that really great burn I got in on Joey C. I made fun of the thing he happened to have happen in his life. Morons. These are people that couldn't get, not just in the room of places I've worked, they couldn't get in the building. They've never done anything. And they self-glorify each other in a small, concentrated group of people, so intellectually and mentally stunted that they think this is a worthwhile pursuit. They're a joke. I'll just say this, and I don't say this about many people or many things. They're beneath me. They're beneath you. Ridiculous. Hey, guess what? Did you hear what insert name of Dabbleverse person did today? I can't believe it. You can't believe that a person who has done something stupid every day for the last 4 years did something stupid today. Wow. Aren't you a mental giant? Whoa, who can believe it? Really? Gosh. Let me just watch this day in, day out, over and over and over and over again. The Donner Party had a bunch of dead horses, but they didn't go out and beat them every day. All right, where are we at? Tim Jenkins says, if people ever try to colonize Mars, we'll get more stories like this. Yes, we will. Terry Nee says, it's a testament to people going to extraordinary efforts to save others. It really is. Let's see here. Goats Growth is extremely one thing, but it's also pretty rad. Goat. Crappy Life says, fair. I do love a circus, says Terry Nee. Goat says, Tom telling it like it is. It is. It's. And here's the other thing. As compared to other sort of groups of people on the internet, even groups as small as theirs or same size or even smaller, they're pretty lame. They think they're a bunch of internet warriors, renegades, and all these other groups are looking at them going, no, you guys are like play school. You're like, you're like the preschool. of making fun of people. Better do a 2-hour live stream about some guy in the Dabbleverse. Yeah. Uncle Fatty brings an updated reality to Eat the Rich. It really does. Foster and Eddie finally arrived at Truckee Lake on March 14th, where they found their children no longer living. Keseberg told Eddie that he had eaten the remains of Eddie's son, and Eddie swore to murder Keseberg if they ever met in California, which you would. George Donner, believe it or not, with his gangrenous arm, and one of Jacob Donner's children were still alive at Alder Creek. Tamsin Donner had just arrived at the Murphy cabin to see her daughters. She chose to return to her husband, even though she was informed that no other relief party was likely to be coming soon. The third relief left with the Donner girls, Simon Murphy, Trudeau, and Clark. Lavinia Murphy was too weak to leave, and Keseberg refused. Yeah, Keseberg, you've been dining yourself on human beings for I don't know how long. They're not likely to have that on the menu at the, waterfront in San Francisco. Two more relief parties were mustered to try to evacuate any adults that might be alive, but both turned back before getting to Bear Valley, and no further attempts were made. On April 10th, almost a month after the third relief left Truckee Lake, the alcalde near Sutter's Fort. Alcalde is the Spanish word for mayor, kind of. Near Sutter's Fort, organized a salvage party because, remember, this was Mexican territory, to recover what they could of the Donner's belongings. Those were sold with parts of the proceeds used to support the orphaned Donner children. The salvage party found near Alder Creek tents exempt except for the body of George Donner, who had died only a few days earlier. On their way back to Truckee Lake, they found Louis Keseberg alive. According to him, Mrs. Murphy had died a week after the departure of the third relief. Yeah, I think he probably used her for a meal. I don't believe anything that guy says. Remember Louis Keseberg? Do I need to show you this guy again? Does this guy look like he wouldn't make a meal out of the lady that was heroically staying behind to take care of the kids? Does he? He doesn't to me. Some weeks later, Tamsin Donner had arrived at his cabin on her way over the pass, soaked and visibly upset. Keseberg said he put a blanket around her and told her to start out in the morning, but she died during the night. The salvage party were suspicious of Keseberg's story and found a pot full of human flesh in the cabin, along with George Donner's pistols, jewelry, and $250 in gold. They threatened to lynch Keseberg, who confessed he had cashed 273 of the Donner's dollars at Tamsin's suggestion so that it could one day benefit her children. I don't believe any of that. Not any of it. Not one word of it. What's our chat room think? Goat says it's insane. Uncle Fatty says high fives to the Gulley Nation. Right back at you. They had to eat them kids, says Goat Scroat. Tim Jenkinson says, damn, George was tough. Well, we never found out. I don't think he was ever. Oh, you mean resilient. Yeah. Uncle Fatty says, is that Steve Bannon's granddad? Baby eater for sure. I don't know. Goat Scroat says he definitely killed her. Yeah, he definitely did. He was the guy that was constantly, whenever anything happened, going, I think we ought to eat him. News of the Donner Party's fate was spread eastward by a journalist by the name of Samuel Brennan, who ran into the salvage party as they came down from the pass with Keseberg. Accounts of the ordeal first reached New York City in July of 1947. Reporting on the event across the United States was heavily influenced by the national enthusiasm for migrating westward. There was a huge push to do that. It was patriotic to do it. In some newspapers, news of the tragedy was buried in small paragraphs, despite the tendency at the time of newspapers to sensationalize everything. Several newspapers, including those in California, wrote about the cannibalism in graphic, exaggerated detail. In some accounts, the members of the Donner Party were depicted as heroes. And in California, a paradise worthy of sacrifices of this kind. Did I not tell this story accurately enough to depict every horrible thing that happened? The old guy whose feet split open, and the dude that ate himself to death, and then the rest of the two Indian guides that had guided and helped these people, being later, the guy who wanted to bury his wagon so he could dig it up later was then all the people, the eating of leather for 4 months. Emigration to the West decreased over the following years, but it's likely that the drop in the numbers was caused by fears over the Mexican-American War. And in 1846, an estimated 1,500 people migrated to California. In 1847, the number dropped to 450 and then to 400 in 1848. But the California gold rush spurred a huge increase in 1949. 25,000 people went west. Most of the overland migration followed the Carson River, but a few 49ers used the same route as the Donner Party and recorded descriptions of the site. In June of 1947, this is some California gold rush people, by the way. In June of 1947, members of the Mormon Battalion under General Stephen W. Kearny buried the human remains and partially burned 2 of the cabins of the Donner Party. The few who ventured over the pass in the next few years found bones, artifacts, and the cabin used by the Reed and Graves families. Many years later, in 1891, a cache of money was found buried by the lake. It had probably been hastily stored there by Mrs. Graves when she left with the second relief, so she could return for it later. What happened to one person in our intrepid story? I bet you're wondering, what happened to one certain person in our story? Lansford Hastings received death threats for his role in the disaster. A migrant who crossed before the Donner Party confronted him about the difficulties they had encountered, reporting, of course, he could say nothing, but that he was very sorry and that he meant well. Of the 87 people who entered the Wasatch Mountains, only 48 survived. Only the Reed and Breen families remained intact. The children of Jacob Donner, George Donner, and Franklin Graves were orphaned. William Eddy was alone. Most of the Murphy family had died. Only 3 mules reached California. The remaining animals all perished. Most of the Donner Party's members' possessions were completely discarded. A few of the widowed women remarried within months. Brides were very, very scarce in California. The Reeds settled in San Jose, and 2 of the Donner children actually lived with him. Reed actually did very well during the California gold rush, and he became a rich, rich man. Virginia wrote an extensive letter to her cousin in Illinois about our troubles getting to California, with editorial oversight from her father. Journalist Edwin Bryant carried it back in 1847, and it was printed in the Illinois Journal on December 16, 1947. Virginia converted to Catholicism, fulfilling a promise she had made to herself while observing Patrick Breen pray in his cabin. The Murphy survivors, well, they settled in a town called Marysville. Tom Waits is from Marysville. Marysville ain't nothing but a white spot in the road. Anyway, the Breens made their way to San Juan Bautista. The Breen family purchased the Castro Adobe in 1848 with a fortune 16-year-old John Breen earned in California's gold country and operated it as an inn. They became the anonymous subjects of J. Ross Brown's story about his severe discomfort upon learning he was staying at the inn of alleged cannibals, which was printed in Harper's Magazine in 1862. Many of the survivors encountered similar reactions. The Breen's youngest daughter, Isabella, was 1 year old during the winter of 1846-1847, and the last survivor of the Donner Party. She died in San Francisco on March 25th, 1935. She was about 90 years old. George and Tamsin Donner's children were taken in by an older couple near Sutter's Fort. Eliza was 3 years old during that fateful winter and the youngest of the Donner children. She published an account of the Donner Party in 1911 based on printed accounts and those of her sisters. Mary Graves married early, but her first husband was murdered. She cooked his killer's food while he was in prison to ensure the condemned man lived long enough to be hanged. Gotta love that Mary. No, I want you to help you stay alive so they can. One of Mary's grandchildren noted she was very serious. She once said, "I wish I could cry, but I cannot. If I could forget the tragedy, perhaps I would know how to cry again." Her brother William had several different occupations, a diverse lifestyle, and his nieces thought he was eccentric, and irascible. Nancy Graves, who was 9 years old during the winter of everything that happened, refused to acknowledge her involvement in the events. She was reportedly unable to recover from her role in the cannibalism of her mother and brother. William Eddy, he remarried and started a family in California. His attempt to follow through on his promise to murder Louis Kesberg was dissuaded by James Reed and Edwin Bryant. A year later, Eddy recalled his experiences to J. Quinn Thornton, who wrote the earliest account of the episode, also using Reed's memories. Eddy died in Petaluma, California in December on Christmas Eve of 1859. Keseberg, what a crumb bum this guy was. I mean, just the crumb bum of all crumb bums. And I mean it. I'm not just saying crumb bum, to be sensational. He brought a defamation suit against several members of the Relief Party who accused him of unaliving Tamsin Donner. A court awarded him $1 in damages, but made him pay court costs. An 1847 story in the California Star described Keseberg's actions in ghoulish terms and his near lynching by the Salvage Party. It reported that he preferred eating human flesh over the cattle and horses exposed in the spring thaw. Historian Charles McGlashan amassed enough material to indict Keseberg for the murder of Tamsin Donner, but after interviewing him, he concluded that didn't occur. Eliza Donner Houghton also believed Keseberg to be innocent. As Keseberg grew older, he did not venture outside as he had become a pariah and was often threatened. He told historian Charles McGlashan, "I often think the Almighty has singled me out among all the men on the face of the earth to see how much hardship, suffering, and misery a human being can bear." The attention directed to the Donner Party, made possible by the reliable accounts of what occurred, and the fact that the cannibalism, although it might be called a minor episode, has become in the popular mind the chief fact to be remembered about the Donner Party, for taboo always allures with as great as strength as it repels. The site of the cabins became a tourist attraction as early as 1854. In the 1880s, Charles McGlashan began promoting the idea of a monument to mark the site. He helped acquire the land for a monument, and in June of 1818, a statue of a pioneer family dedicated to the Donner Party was placed on the spot where the Breen-Keysburg cabin was thought to have stood. It was made a California historical landmark in 1834. The state of California created, sorry audio podcast listeners, what I am showing to you now, which is quite beautiful. They created Donner Memorial State Park, 11 acres surrounding this monument in 1927. 20 years later, the site of the Murphy cabin was purchased and added to the park. In 1962, the Emigrant Trail Museum was added to tell the history of westward migration into California. The Murphy cabin and the Donner Monument were established as a national historic landmark in 1863. And Bill's Donner Stew Hut, a retail fast food restaurant, was, I'm kidding, that was never opened. That was just me trying to have a little fun. A large rock served as the back end of the fireplace of the Murphy cabin, and a bronze plaque has been affixed to the rock listing the members of the party, indicating which survived and which, did not survive. The state of California calls the episode an isolated and tragic incident of American history that has been transformed into a major folk epic. As of 2003, the park receives an estimated 200,000 visitors a year and an estimated 200,000 survivors. Most historians count 87 members of the party. There's some fudging on that. There's some historians believe there's 90. 5 people had already perished before the party reached Truckee Lake. Tuberculosis guy, 3 from trauma, including the one guy that was probably offed by his buddies. 1 from exposure, the 70-year-old guy with the split feet. 34 died between December of 1946 and April of 1846 and 1847. 25 males, 9 females. A lot of researchers have studied these mortalities to see if it matched survival in nutritionally deprived individuals. Anyway, a professor stated the Donner Party episode is a case study of demographically meditated natural selection in action, which is a nice way of saying they just figured out who to eat. I won't get into the memories and rumors of the cannibalism. Okay, I'll get into some of it. Georgia Donner wrote to historian Charles McGlashan to clarify some points, saying that the human flesh was prepared for people in both the tents at Alder Creek, but to her recollection, it was only given to the youngest children. Father was crying and did not look at us the entire time, and we little ones felt we could not help it. There was nothing else. She also remembered that Elizabeth Donner, Jacob Donner's wife, announced one morning she had cooked the arm of Samuel Shoemaker. Hey kids, I cooked Samuel Shoemaker's arm. Why would you announce that? Come and get it. Archaeological findings at the Alder Creek camp proved inconclusive for the evidence of cannibalism. None of the bones tested there could be identified with certainty as human. Margaret Breen insisted that she and her family did not cannibalize the dead, but Christian Johnson Ethan Rarick and Joseph King, whose account is sympathetic to the Breen family, do not consider it credible that the Breens, who had been without food for 9 days, would have survived otherwise. There was basically just a lot of, I didn't eat anybody. Yeah, you did. No, I didn't. A lot of that going on after everybody had a full meal. And so, in this epic episode of the Tom Gulley Show, I will tell you, that's really all I have to tell you about the Donner Party. And I will say, in some agreement with the people that have said otherwise, this was a horrifying tale. If you take the cannibalism out of it, you can take the cannibalism out of the boy, but you can't take the boy out of the cannibalism, they like to say. It was a horrible, horrible, horrible tale before all of the cannibalism happened. The cannibalism made it a lot worse, don't get me wrong, but it was bad before that. Let's see here. What do we got in our chat? The Reeds didn't deserve to survive. Well, here's Tim Jenkinson. I would agree with you except for one thing. James Reed made like 2 big attempts. Now remember, they cast him out. Wasn't his fault. But he was the one that kept making the attempts to get back to them. That's his only saving grace. Tim Jenkinson said, I bet there are a lot of the guests, Goat says, talk about PTSD. People back then were so much more badass, it probably didn't affect them much. Maybe. Judy Tester says, Tom, don't say crumb bum. Don't do it. You'll summon them. Crappy at Life says, Keysburg. Goat says, hell yeah. Great research, great show, says the chef. And I'm glad the chef is here. If I was on a trip like this, I would want the chef with me to, let's just say, spruce up some of the human board of fare. Tim Jenkinson says, yeah, amazing story. You were really good with what you do, Tom. Thank you, Tim. I appreciate it. What I'm doing over here, Tim, when I do these shows is I'm just trusting the process, really. Crappy at Life says, Caldecott did nothing wrong. Uncle Fatty says, Worcestershire sauce or Heinz 57. Well, Worcestershire, I think. You got to go with Worcestershire. Rich Giraffe says, I was listening in the background while working. Great show. Thank you. Absolutely horrifying. I need a cigarette. Tim Jenkins says, great story, though. Crappy at Life says he later went on to write Eastbound and Down. That's Jerry Reed. Rich Giraffe says, one more thing. You had the Twilight Zone show. Guess who was in a Dimensional Mishap episode? A Donner guy. Wow. Was he hungry? I'm thinking about doing a show tomorrow, just as kind of a little joke to the world, on automats. One of the viewers asked me to do a show on automats, which I don't know if you guys know what those are, but they were like cafeterias that you bought food out of a spinning kind of a vending machine. Goat Scrot says, Chef, if you had to cook human, how would you go about it? Like pork? Like chicken? I don't even know what song to play to get out of here. I know this week I'm going to do a show on automats. I think I will do a show on automats tomorrow. Somebody asked me really nicely if I would. And I was thinking about doing that several months ago. If I can find enough info, I'll do that. I'm also going to be doing a show on a TV program called Insight. Many of you may not have seen Insight. It was on for like 23 years. It was on from like 1960 to 1983, although it was in reruns long after that. The Catholic Church, the Paulist division of the Catholic Church, had an organization called Paulist Productions that was run by a guy named Bud Kaiser, a priest, Father Bud Kaiser, who was like 6'6". He's giant. Crew cut. Looks like he's kind of scary, but he's got a real gentle voice, you know. Why do people love? Anyway, he would open up the show, and then Polished Productions would do these half-hour teleplays about moral issues. They're very dramatic. And they were written by the best writers in Hollywood, and they had the best actors at the time volunteering to do these productions. You can see them all on YouTube if you type Insight TV show. They're really, really good. And if you're a family like mine, we went to early mass on Sundays. So we'd get up super early, go to mass, have breakfast super early, and then you go downstairs, you want to watch TV if it was too cold to work outside or do anything, which frequently it was in Indiana. And everything that was on was religious. It was all these religious shows, religious. But Insight, though, it was kind of a religious show, but it was a real dramatic show. It was a show you could watch. It was a thing. So Insight, I'll see that anyway. Rich Giraffe says he was lost and wandered into a diner 100 years into the future, which was the 1960s. Well, actually, it would have been the 1940s, 120 years in the future. Uncle Fatty says, remind me of the old couple on the Book of Eli movie. Oh, yeah. Tim Jenkins says, makes me wonder if this is what MAGA is referring to. Maybe Trump has a taste for human flesh. I don't know. Chef says, Goat, I think Tom just answered your questions. Scary with a gentle voice like Mike Tyson. Yeah, but this guy's huge. Elwood Bud Chrysler. Father Elwood Bud Chrysler. How about that one that mentions a chef? Everything mentions a chef. I'm trying to think of which song to play. I am toying with the idea. Just toying with it, mind you. Just toying with this idea. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but unless a show is thematically requiring something else, I'm thinking of making this song the all-time ending of the show because it's shorter and I like it a lot. Let's see here. Rich Giraffe says, sorry, it was the episode 100 Yards Over the Rim. It wasn't directly based on them, but it's interesting. Well, Twilight Zone did that a lot. They would not... It would be based on something, but you knew what they were talking about. They just didn't want to get any legal trouble, you know. Anyway, I got shows coming up this week. Looks like next week is the week of the move. We'll see. But I'm almost positive it is. Rich Giraffe says, cheers. Thanks. That's all I got to tell you about the Donner Party. And looking at that old clock on the wall, and it says it's time for me to Amscray. This is the truth. I'm not just making a joke. I am starving right now. I haven't eaten all day. Tim Jenkins says, we need a Donner Party song, something cheerful. Well, let's ask Leon Kennedy about that. I haven't seen him lately. I kind of want to do a Friday night show with him, but haven't figured out a topic. But he's a wonderful man, and we appreciate all of his efforts. Tom's a Rolling Stone, says Crappy Alive. Well, you guys, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. And with all that being said, I thank all of you for being here. Especially would like to thank Crappy at Life for his very generous $10 in donations. The show appreciates your support so much. Those likes and shares really do matter. And subscribes, all that free stuff. You won't have to deal with the idiot and his car anymore. Well, that disappeared a long time ago. But there's other idiots. Ghost Goat says, Tom, I'm hankering for the other white meat. Where I'm going, I shouldn't have to deal with anything. 2,500 square miles, 2,000 people. Out in the middle of nowhere, in the mountains of Utah. I'll never look at meat again. Thanks. Well, it's always been different. It's hard to eat a hamburger when you knew the cow. It's a farmer's dilemma. Anyway, with all that being said, the only thing left to say, and you guys tell me what, if you think this should be the ending song, because I think it should be the ending song from now on. It's a shorter one. And it's just a stone groove, my man. Thank you all for being here. You guys are the greatest. Couldn't do it without you. Wouldn't do it without you. And with all that being said, I think the only thing left to say is, till next time. We'll see you next time. Company. Are we having company over? Till next time, we'll see you next time.
Tom Gulley's here. G-U-L-L-E-Y. He's here to stay. G-U-L-L-E-Y. The Gulley guarantee. That's what the people need. We're all here to see Tom Gulley. G-U-L-L-E-Y. G-U-L-L-E-Y. Tom Gulley's here. G-U-L-L-E-Y. He's here to stay. The lights are low, so start the show. Tom's here to go, so let it roll.